Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at the Howling Abomination. So this is a 5 mana Gruul commander. It's a 5/5 with haste, and it says it has trample as long as you've cast 3 or more spells this turn. And then the important part, whenever it becomes the target of a spell, it gets +2 until end of turn, and it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to have as many cheap spells, especially ones that cantrip, that target a single permanent. So Howling Abomination in this case. And we're going to try to cycle those cards over and over and over, continuously targeting Howling Abomination to burn all of our opponents out of the game, alongside some other cards that will increase the amount of damage that Howling Abomination does. And then obviously we're going to need a bunch of fast mana as well so that we can keep just churning through cards. So to begin with, we've got some ways of increasing the amount of damage that we're doing. So Fiery Inscription and Gutter Snipe will also trigger off of the many cheap spells that we're doing. So these are basically copies 2 and 3 of Howling Abomination. We have Kedis, which only applies to combat damage, but a Howling Abomination is going to get very big. So this can potentially one-shot an opponent, and then Kedis will multiply that damage to our other opponents. And then we have Psychotic Fury, which is a way of giving Howling Abomination double strike, and it draws a card. So it triggers Howling Abomination, and it means we only need to cast half as many cards to make this lethal. Then we've got a whole bunch of cantrips, obviously a ton of things that target, so Ancestral Anger, Charge Through, etc. Basically, if it was 1 mana spell that it said target a creature and it drew a card, that's going in the deck. Dragon Mantle similarly also targets it because it's an aura. And given how many of these spells we're playing, we're going to want cards like Artist Talent and DRC to filter through our cards so we're not hitting lands or just other things we don't want. We've got additional card draw with a card that I want to point out in particular as Season of Growth, an enchantment that says whenever a creature enters Scry 1, and more importantly, whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. Then we've got our big combo pieces. So we've got Underworld Breach as a way to reuse all of the cards that we put in the graveyard, and then importantly, Ground Rift. So Ground Rift is target creature without flying can't block this turn, and Storm. So once we've cast enough spells, we can Ground Rift, and we can point this at Howling Abomination, and we can point all of the copies at Howling Abomination, and every single one of them will trigger it. We also have Zada over here, so if instead of Howling Abomination we've got Zada in play, we can point our cantrips at Zada instead, and multiply those across all of our creatures. So it will still trigger the Howling Abomination for the spells targeting it, and we get to draw even more cards. We of course have all of our fast mana, so some of the best ones being things like Stormkiln Artist, Bergi, Runaway Steamkin, and Urabras to keep churning through the cards, but we have a bunch of other one-shots like Jessica's Will and whatnot. A Gruul mana base, nothing much to see here. Protection to make sure that Howling Abomination does not get countered or killed. Bunch of ramp, some removal, and that is pretty much going to do it. I also considered running a number of other cards like Grape Shot, but Ground Rift basically does the same thing, but for cheaper, and actually winds up doing more damage than Grape Shot does. Festival of Embers, I debated between this one, Past in Flames, and Underworld Breach. Ultimately, I felt like Underworld Breach was probably the better out of all of these cards, but these are potentially other options as well to recur all of our spells. And so that is going to do it for the Howling Abomination in EDH.